want to thank you all for coming and joining us on this pre-recorded webinar. Our outcomes for our time together are to share some of the recommendation and implementations that we learned about from our recently published study in a textbook called Leading Schools in Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. We'll have a stoking activity. We'll also share a little bit about who we are, define SEL, talk about the problem solution, outcomes, and learns. And of course, some feedback at the end. We have 60 minutes to do this in. Hopefully we wrap up a little bit sooner. We ask that you come with an open mind. We are monitoring the live chat, and so we ask that you engage with us there. And we will be using polls. Also are asking all folks to complete the feedback survey at the end. And then, of course, join our live round table discussion after this presentation. So for our stoking activity, we are going to ask if you could use the chat function on your in the presentation. Why are manhole covers round? So think about the why behind that, and feel free to chat. Like I said, Kara and I will be monitoring that and engaging there. You have a minute to do so. We'll start our timer, and you can just chime in and share your thoughts on this. No right or wrong answers, really, just kind of something fun to get your brain going.
Starting now.
Awesome. So thank you all for your answers and for chiming in on that. Here are a few reasons why the manhole cover is round. And I'm sure that some of those responses are in there, and maybe even some new ones that we hadn't even thought of. This is something that we like to just kind of throw in there, get your juices going, thinking Google actually uses this as part of their interview process, and just to kind of see where folks are at, and if they have maybe a little bit more of a creative side, or how they problem solve on these. So again, thank you for participating.
I hope you all had some fun. Now let's get into a little bit about what we're going to share with you today. And the knowledge that we're able to share with you emerged from a study that we recently published. The study involved piloting our social emotional learning lessons in CTE classes with our partner, Clark County School District. So before we get into that, let's let our colleague Edgar share who Imago is, so we can provide you with a little bit of clarity on the SEL content that was used in the study.
Awesome.
Now for introductions. I'm Edgar Blunt. I'm with a company called Imago. We consider ourselves a group of creators, learners, and shenanigators, and we're based here in Fresno, California. And what we want to change the way that we measure success today. We want to embed social emotional learning into all human experiences. And that matters to us because we believe that by developing these skills, these emotional competencies are what helps us unlock the best versions of ourselves and really helps us thrive in today's complicated world. We do this in two ways. First, through our digital curricula. We have over 225 lessons on our learning platforms with titles like self-control, resilience, design thinking, civic engagement, and heuristics. These lessons are carefully designed to keep students engaged while reducing the program load on educators. Secondly, we support our mission through training. Our professional development helps us increase the effectiveness of the lessons by giving our educators the tools and the resources to facilitate lessons and conversations around topics like empathy and introspection, which many of them haven't been classically trained to do. We have our own lens of emotional intelligence.
Our model has 6 categories: self-awareness, social awareness, global awareness, ethical decision-making, relationship skills, and self-management. Self-awareness is the ability to understand one's own character, desires, feelings, and motives. Basically, I matter. Social awareness, the ability to understand someone else's character, desires, feelings, and motives. Others matter. Global awareness, the ability to understand how cultural, economic, environmental, social, and political factors influence people and vice versa. Systems matter. Ethical decision-making, the ability to evaluate decisions ethically and navigate situations. Decisions matter. Relationship skills, the ability to build and maintain healthy relationships with people who are similar and different. Relations matter. Self-management, the ability to manage one's own behaviors, desires, feelings, and motives. Engagement matters. As we talk about developing emotional intelligence, it's important to operationalize them so that we can target and teach them more effectively.
Knowing this, we invite you to say, when people say, we need soft skills or better leaders or mental wellness, they really mean we need to increase our emotional intelligence or EI competencies. Let's stoke a more common language around human development together.
Thanks for that overview, Edgar.
That was awesome.
So at this point, you might be wondering a little bit of the why behind SEL and CTE. And before we get to this, let's all reflect for a moment on skills that are needed by the workforce now and maybe in the near future. So right now, using your chat box, please chat in some of the skills that you think are in demand now or might be very soon from employers, and we'll take another minute for y'all to do this and pause for you.
Awesome.
Okay, so now that we've all taken a minute to share, thank you. Right here is a list of the top 15 skills anticipated for the year 2025. This came out of a study done by the World Economic Forum last year. And so I'm sure that you're seeing some of the skills that you identified in this list of the top 15 skills. I'll give you a minute to look it over, and then I'll let Melissa take the floor.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. So as we saw those skills on the screen, what challenges do you see in making sure your students have these skills? Even though they say those things are needed in the 2025, we know that sometimes those things are already coming up or they're already being talked about. And so how do we create an environment where industry experts aren't saying these skills are lacking? How can we then, create this and have an opportunity to engage with our students and make sure that they have these needed skills when they go into the workforce? So you'll see on the screen, again, some our employers are already saying that they are, finding it challenging to have folks be ready to go with these skills. Only 16% of people feel that a 4-year degree effectively prepares people for today's jobs. And then schools need additional resources to help make sure that they're teaching these 21st century skills, as we like to call them at times, because they're in demand. And so when we're talking about this in students, it really does fall on the individual to try and make sure that they have these skills. But is there a way that we can help incorporate and make sure that they maybe are getting exposure or learning them while they're in school, or and primary from secondary school, and then that 4-year degree as well? So we see that there's a challenge. We see that employers are looking for that, and there's momentum, but it's not necessarily happening as fast as our employers would like. So what do we do about that, Kara?
You ask a great question, Melissa. So what we've done is we've looked through a lot of the literature, and experts are realizing there's this overlap between SEL and what a lot of CTE programs commonly use to gauge learning outcomes, which are called employability skills frameworks. So the experts suggest addressing the skills gap by integrating SEL sort of as a more holistic approach to employability skills into the CTE programs. And one interesting thing, something that Melissa had hit on a little, is these experts are also advising that teachers, they can't just be given it, they also need to be provided with opportunities to acquire the knowledge and also familiarize themselves with the tools to do this effectively for students. When it boils down to it, there are a lot of programs that are teaching to these skills to some degree or another, but they often do so in sort of a mechanistic or a linear way, sort of the idea of teaching kids what to think versus how to think. The real world's not mechanistic and linear, it's messy, and it's interconnected in more ways than we understand or ever really realize. And so that requires people to adapt in situationally appropriate ways and then apply that technical knowledge. And so that's where SEL comes in, because it can help build better skills and better enable people to navigate the world in this sense a little more successfully.
Awesome, Kara. And I like how you said that it's not linear, that our world is, it's constantly moving. There's messy and it's motions, and it doesn't just go, in a straight line. There's movement. And so having these skills is really important to be able to navigate that. Because again, it's not just the textbook way of doing it. There's other components that come into it in order for us to be successful. So when we're talking about SEL, or social emotional learning, there's language and framework, and it varies. So some folks define it in very different ways. You saw Edgar, he explained our version of how we define emotional intelligence, SEL. But we want to kind of just make sure that everybody's on the same page for this presentation. And so when we are talking about social emotional learning, it's developing and practicing and understanding the cognitive, social, and emotional competencies, along with promoting productive mindsets, having habits for successfully navigating and setting up goals. And then, of course, building and managing relationships in this complex world, regulating our behaviors, very important, along with interpreting and understanding experiences, not only from our perspective, but from someone else's.
I love that you touched on this too, because language can be so funny. The same words can mean something totally different to somebody else. And with there being so much difference between the different frameworks that are out there, I'm really glad that you clarified. There's a lot more, I think, cognitive component, the reasoning and planning skills to this than a lot of people usually consider right up front.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. So we're going to put up that list of top 15 skills for 2025. And as we've mentioned, these skills are needed now too, not just in 2025. We're realizing that needs to happen along with the future. But you'll see that these skills really align with those social emotional competencies. And they're in the bold there on the screen. You'll see that's where they fall into those areas. And even 7 and 8 are really can fall into your SEL competencies as well, from ethically creating technology and interacting with technology, along with keeping the end user in mind and having empathy for those that you're working with or engaging with. And so again, all of these areas can fall into SEL competencies. And so in order for our young people to be able to navigate this complex world, we hope that they have these skills and continue to learn and build upon these skills.
That's a great point, Melissa, about numbers 7 and 8 on there too. It makes me think of design thinking and how all the literature and all the approaches to training design thinking really emphasize empathy. You have to really understand when you create designs, who's going to be using it and how it's going to feel to that user.
Absolutely. Great point on that as well, for sure.
All right, so imagine you're tasked to implement SEL right now in your organization. Where do you start? Who needs to be involved? How much time will be dedicated to the training, to teaching in the classroom? When's that going to happen? How much time do you have to devote to follow-up, evaluation? What approaches are you going to use? So don't get overwhelmed. I know I'm asking a lot of questions very quickly, and we'll get at some of those things, but these are the types of things that you need to start talking and thinking about in order to begin designing space for SEL in your organization.
Absolutely. And some of you may already be farther down the road than others, and that's okay. We're going to talk about that as well. Definitely something to discuss in our live conversation. But if you're just beginning, or maybe you're reevaluating your system, you might need to reconsider some of those things and take a look at those things.
So we're curious, is SEL gaining steam or already happening in your organization or program? So we're going to listen to that wonderful soothing song again and give you another minute. And we ask that you please respond to a poll that we'll put up for you. And then also, if you have any questions or experiences with SEL programming that you'd also like to share, please feel free to send those in the chat after answering the poll question. It would be great to be able to have conversations with you through the chat about that.
Awesome.
The video timer didn't start, I promise. That it relaxes me. It kind of reminds me of like a bootleg version of Jack Johnson music.
Nice.
So thank you, everyone. I hope that was a relaxing minute. You got a chance to respond to the poll and send any conversations you wanted to get out there.
Awesome.
And so if you are implementing or thinking about SEL, like we said, this is pre-recorded, so we can't see your responses. I wish we could, but we'd love to talk to you about them in the chat. But if you are doing this or thinking about it, you're on the right path. And I think if you're here, most of you probably are thinking about this, right?
Definitely.
And so according to Castle's 2019 report on SEL adoption, SEL is gaining clout across the United States. We have some statistics on the screen there from that report that you can check out.
Kara, as you were showing that on the screen, one thing that I like to kind of bring up too about SEL is we teach that very regularly, and in a very natural way in our elementary schools. And sometimes we don't continue that conversation as we get into high school. And remember, our young people are still learning, and they're still going through these different complex challenges. And so it shouldn't stop there, because even as adults, we're still trying to learn and practice these SEL skills. And so one of the things that has been really neat for us here at Imago is that we've been able to partner with CTE department at Clark County School District, and that's in the high school. And so again, realizing that SEL doesn't stop once we're done with elementary, we need to continue that conversation in middle school and high school. And so Clark County was really innovative, and we really enjoyed working with them, and I still enjoy working with them, I should say, and their CTE department to implement Imago's SEL curriculum through their college and career readiness CTE programs and career technical education. And so as Edgar had mentioned, we have over 200 digital lessons, and then they are on career related topics and with exploration along with SEL. And then they have facilitator guides and of course professional development that we did. So that's the challenge that Clark County chose to accept, and we were there with them to take on that challenge. So how did we start? There's a few steps. Yep, we're going to cover those. And this is information, and Kara will reiterate this too, is all in the textbook. So it's really cool if you wanted to read a little more in-depth of scenario of this. The textbook has that information in there as well. So our first step of implementing with Clark County was building relationships. The work begins by knowing each other beyond client and vendor. And we say that because we really took the time to learn what their needs were and their hopes and outcomes were. And so we made sure that we understood that, knew that what they were looking for, what they needed for their students. And so we built a relationships before we even started rolling out anything to ensure that what they entrusted us with, we made sure that it was going to happen. And then we planned out, we rolled out a plan. We did a pilot with that, and then, full rollout later on. And so again, all this happening in CTE, but the design was to stay in CTE to find some really innovative teachers as then step 3, but really piloting it first to make sure that we worked out some kinks, found out what was working and what didn't work. So then identifying those teachers that are comfortable with incorporating technology. They've got to embrace technology because we are a digital platform with non-digital activities. And then being willing to teach this and kind of go out of their comfort zone too when it comes to incorporating technology into what they were doing and having discussion on subject matter that maybe isn't something they regularly did, or they do, but they didn't do it in maybe as structured as they could with by using Imago's lessons.
And so, Mel, I think I really like how you touched on building relationships and designing the plan. And I think the building relationships part seemed very important for making sure that both of you understood each other, the key stakeholders guiding this from Clark County, and then us as well, to make sure that we are able to provide what they want and what they need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, because if we weren't able to deliver what they wanted, then it's not going to be a good fit for either one of us. And that's something you definitely have to consider when you're implementing these types of programs, is it's making sure it's going to work for you and those that you're working with, where you're getting your technology from or your lessons from. Client vendor, again, it's more than that. And we're very proud that it is more than that.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I might be misremembering, but as far as rolling out, we only started, the administrators we worked with only wanted us to implement with a handful of pre-selected teachers. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So it was, as we said, pilot. So we had a pilot program so that you, identified those teachers, you were able to make sure that those teachers were on board, ready to do it, along with willing to, kind of fail and then learn from it as well. So they were very specific, and we even started in the spring of a school year just to give them some time to get comfortable with what was, coming out and what was going on. Great.
So this, just hearing you talk about this and being familiar with the processes that you use with all of our partners, not just Clark County.
Correct.
I think, to me, at face value, it sounds like it requires a good time investment, but I'm curious because you're more partner facing, you have more of those direct relationships with the stakeholders, the leaders in the different school districts and orgs we work with. Do they ever say that the process they take with us is a larger time investment compared to what they would usually do when adopting new curricula, or is it about the same?
From my perspective and my interactions with our administrators and our teachers, we're a little bit different. We're a little bit more unique. We take the time to really get to know folks, to, like you said, understand what their pain points are and make sure that we're able to address those. We don't want to sign on with something that isn't going to work. So yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit longer. Definitely is a little bit longer, but from our experience, it's been longer is better. So.
Mm-hmm. And I agree, because from what I've seen, especially in the data, is it turns out to actually be a good fit, as opposed to maybe when you adopt curriculum and you just sort of have to talk to a salesperson very briefly and read up on it for the most part online. So I love seeing that.
Thanks, Kara. That's awesome. So then our other steps or process was not only, having those teachers be comfortable with the technology, but they had to really be familiar or willing to discuss unfamiliar topics and sharing their own stories. So I'd mentioned like embracing, maybe some awkward conversations, because maybe you don't regularly talk about things like empathy, or maybe you're not always talking about, well, maybe you are, but you're not incorporating it in such a structured manner, because you do talk about digital safety or what it means to have self-control, but be able to kind of embrace the awkward and then be willing to share your stories so that we can share those with others. And so that everybody's learning from each other, what worked for them, what they adjusted, what they, took away from the time there. And then training. Lots of training from not only understanding the digital platform, but then understanding how to engage with your students, how to have guided conversations, how to use a facilitator guide so that you can ask, thoughtful discussion questions and then think ahead questions so that you can really get those conversations going. And then lastly, of course, is that check-in, follow up consistently, making sure they have the tools and resources they need so that we can support them if anything should come up. So Kara, now that we've done all of that, we did all that with Clark County a few years ago to be exact. What were our outcomes? What did we learn? What happened?
Well, I'd love to share that with you. So let's look at what conspired out of all of this, because it's exciting.
I think so too.
So what we did is we thematically analyzed study guide responses. Each of our lessons have a lot of open-ended, sort of the nature of these questions having no real right or wrong answers, asking a lot about application. So we embed these questions at the end of the videos within our lessons, and that's what the data was that we used to analyze and sort of gauge the value of this to students and learn and understand a little bit about how it might be impacting them. And so, yes, like I was saying, almost 3,000 students who accessed the lessons, and results generally revealed that most students were able to interpret and apply the lesson concepts in contextually appropriate and pretty meaningful ways. The sample results that we've included in the slide and the next one that you'll see, I think they do a good job to illustrate a consistent pattern that we've found throughout all the results. And so, like Melissa had recommended, if you're interested in learning more about these, you can check out the chapter, you can connect with us and we can talk about it. But they reveal this consistent pattern that we found, and this is what I get excited about, of students' personal application of the social emotional skills to their own lives. And seeing that kind of finding emerge is just really promising, because I used to be a very quantitative data kind of person, but being able to incorporate this qualitative data, it kind of gives you the warm and fuzzy feel goods inside to help you realize, wow, what these students are saying, it's impactful and sometimes heavy. And then you realize these students, they're young adults. They have a lot going on, and it's good to be able to give them tools to help navigate that and see them talk about it. And so I look at this as these results are suggesting that students are developing and practicing a lot of metacognitive and building these social emotional skills.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kara. Again, I get excited about this too. I never was a data person until Kara explained to me how this data works, and it's so exciting and gets me excited about this. And I like that you pointed out that these were open-ended questions, and we like to tell the students and the teachers, of course, when we get to engage with students, but we reinforce with teachers is there's not necessarily right or wrong answers on the open-ended. It's really their thoughts on the subject matter. And the hope is that by taking the lessons, engaging in conversations with their teachers, that they're learning and maybe changing or shifting their mindset of what they thought at the beginning versus what happens at the end. So again, not right or wrong, but just their perspective, their thoughts on it. And then hopefully it's either a shift to, understanding another person's perspective in some of these subject matters.
That's a really good point, that shift in perspective and gaining perspective. I think that's something really valuable that they take away when they're able to see what other people have to say in response to these questions.
Absolutely.
And one thing I'll point out is, although this is qualitative data, these findings considered as a whole suggest really promising value of SEL and CTE for student skill development. And we definitely look forward to more extensively and robustly studying SEL's impact on CTE as implementation continues in our partnerships. So the stats that we showed you, now that I'm looking at this one, it might be useful to give you a little bit of background. So I'll just touch on this statistic that's on the screen. So within our accountability lesson, we provide students with a step-by-step process of how to hold yourself and hold others accountable. It includes things like setting plans, setting timelines, things like that. Please, if I'm missing something, Mel.
No, that's good. Yeah.
And so that's what this statistic is about students identifying where in their lives, what are things they can do, and what do they do normally, where these steps would be helpful for them to help make sure they are accountable to finishing things that they've committed to, or to making sure that if they're doing group work with others or somebody's promised something to them, making sure that those people stay accountable as well.
Right. And then again, Kara, these are skills not only for our youth, but I think adults we need to be reminded of as well. And so it provides an opportunity as teachers and educators to be able to kind of do their own reflection and see how we're promoting these types of ideas, and how are we supporting to make sure that our students are getting these skills, because these are the skills that are needed in order for them to be successful adults, to be able to navigate the not only college but career if they're going on trade schools, whatever their path may be after high school. If it's directly to work, they're going to need all of these skills in order to be successful and continue to grow as individuals.
Thank you. And Melissa, that makes me think of something you had touched on earlier, where you're saying it's not just elementary age students. We don't just need to learn these when we're younger, because you need to keep learning them and building them. But I also think of it sort of like math, like the very technical topics that you're taught in school. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so I always think, when I look at these study guides and go through them, or go through the lessons and look at the data, it's almost a good refresher even for me as an adult. And so especially for these high school students, and we have middle school students who even use as well, it's good just to make sure they're continuing to practice and evolve those skills.
Yes, absolutely. Continue to evolve and practice them. Definitely. And they take practice. I know that, I think we had self-control on the screen before that. That's something that we have to exercise no matter what age we are every single day. We show an example in the lesson about, when you're starving, you go for the first thing you see versus, holding on and going for the healthier option, which is just a simple example, but it's real. Like, that's a real thing that we have to deal with and kind of remind ourselves. Self-control. Should I say what I really think right now, or should I hold back for a moment and let my thoughts kind of calm down? So again, exercising these things, it takes practice, and we have to do it on a regular basis. So from all the students' responses, from the process, from what we put together, what did we learn? What were our learning outcomes from this information, from all the things that we put together? We're going to share that. So for those of you that are starting implementation, or maybe you're in the middle, maybe you are way far down the line and you have your own implementation suggestions, I'm sure that there are those hopefully on this webinar that could share some of those things. But from our experience and what we learned with Clark County was that making sure that first thing was that goal alignment. Prior to selecting any SEL program, whether it's Imago's content or anyone else's, make sure that it aligns with your program's goals and your standards, the things that you're, hold important and that you're trying to achieve. So again, whatever you're using, make sure that it aligns with what your outcomes and your goals are for your organization and for your district.
And I think so. I think this could be applicable to not just CTE, wherever that you find it's relevant and meaningful to implement this. But as far as those standards you're talking about, Melissa, those can be formal standards that are state or nationwide. And then they could also probably be district or organization specific, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have like a graduate profile that you're wanting to align with, or different characteristics that you're hoping your students, and when they graduate, they need these different things. That's also on there. So yes, formal standards along with your specific standards for your organization or district. Yep. And then a point person. This was something that we learned and have learned with pretty much the majority of all of our partners. When you have someone dedicated to help with the curriculum mapping, coaching, and integration, if you have one or maybe a team, but you've identified at least a few people to be that point person, the success is so much, it happens faster. Because that person is a person that understands the content, that understands a platform. Maybe they know how to work around some things, and then they also know how to align with the work that you're doing at your district, and then what is you're using, if it's Imago or whatever you're using, they know how to make those things mesh well so that your teachers, when they get something new, they're not overwhelmed. They know that there's a plan, they know that there's a reason, and they're presented with the, that map so that they can then roll it out in a very succinct manner. And then PD, invest in extended training, set time in PLCs. These subject matters topics on SEL, teachers, a lot of them are integrating it already, touch on it in their classrooms as it is. However, sometimes they're not as comfortable with the subject matter. Maybe they're not really ready to dive into a lesson on, say, we've used empathy before, but maybe resilience. They're not really sure how to approach that subject matter. So having time for them to kind of play around in the platform, look at the content, be able to look at facilitator guides, and then ask questions about how to go through these things is really important so that they feel confident when they deliver the lessons to their students.
So Mel, can you explain, using Clark County as an example, sort of how they approached extended PD?
Yes, we were very fortunate. We've always been really fortunate with Clark County and the amount of training they allow with their teachers and their point person. It may not be all their teachers per se, but it's somebody from, say, the school that's going to be that point person will come to one of our trainings. One of our last ones we did pre-COVID was a full day. I mean, we had teachers, luckily the district paid for subs, which again, I know is not always the case, but we are grateful for that, to have the time with those teachers. And we had a full day of training, and we covered things from just setting up your classroom, engaging with your students, talked about the platform itself, the Imago platform, and how to use it so that folks were comfortable and not intimidated by the technology. And then we dove into lessons, and we broke up teachers into groups and allowed them to look at a lesson, say for 15, 30 minutes, and then come back and present it to the rest of us. And so that allowed teachers time to really get their hands in and understand what they had access to, find opportunities to really bridge where the lessons might fit with what they were doing in their classroom. So again, that was the last one that we did, and that was very successful. We had great feedback from that training. And I enjoyed it too, because I got to get new ideas and new ways of thinking about our lessons from the teachers, from the experts. They're the ones rolling it out. So when I get to hear their ideas, I get to share that with others as well.
I think I love that you touch on this and that we've been able to ascertain this from our experiences with the teachers that we work with, because it's so important, especially with any curriculum, but especially with an SEL curriculum. And it's outside of Clark County, we also have teachers teaching core subjects. And I think something they really struggle with is finding relevance. So finding, where does this really fit within my course plans? And then once they're at that point, because SEL it's very subjective, but there are very few purely right or wrong answers to a lot of the approaches and things that you have to consider with it. Teachers, a lot of them feel uncomfortable because they don't feel familiar enough. They feel like they need more expertise, better understanding. I think maybe because teachers probably get so used to grading and knowing that there is a for sure right or wrong answer, and they probably expect that out of SEL, it seems like, right?
Right, yes.
And so to talk to the funding, because I know, like Melissa had mentioned, it's probably not immediately feasible to be able to pay for substitutes for something like an entire department at your school or at your organization. I do know that, especially in the past few months, I've talked to some colleagues of mine, and there is a lot of COVID-related new federal funding out there that you can apply for, and it can be used specifically for teacher PD, teacher development and learning. And their specific focus and the big drive behind a lot of this funding is SEL related. It's wellness, better mindfulness, and better engagement. So if that's something you're interested in and you're not familiar with that, definitely reach out and I can give you the names of some of those funding sources, because I think those applications are going on now.
Very cool, Kara. Thank you for adding that in, because again, it can be, it takes money to get these things going. And so having the resources available, it can be challenging, but it also sounds like there's opportunities out there right now. So that's really good. And our teachers need it. We know that. Our students need it and our teachers need it. So that whatever we can do to support them to make this transition back to a new school year even better.
Yep, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. So a few other things that we'll highlight, blended teaching. So encourage and support a blended teaching model. When we say blended teaching, that is, yes, it's digital technology. You can play our content on a screen, or you can also assign it digitally to students and learners to do it on their own. When we incorporate blended, that means not just letting the students do it on their own, but having some type of conversation, guided discussion, either prior to the lesson or after a student does it, or even during it. There's 3 different ways we usually touch on, and it's engaging before the lesson, having students take the lesson, engage with them after, or running the lesson all together and just having this guided conversation and discussion on the lesson topics. And that's where it is so valuable for these students to hear others' perspectives, not only a teacher's perspective, but their peers' perspective. Because again, understanding where you're coming from, why you value the things you value, or show that you value something is really important for us as individuals to be able to have empathy and be able to work together, at least know where somebody's coming from when they act the way they act. And so communication. So that's blended teaching when we touch on that. Communication, really important. We all know this. Clearly communicating the goals and expectations of what the use of the content is. Does everyone understand what your goals are for your students? What are they supposed to be getting out of it? And expectations of use, just in general. How is this going to be rolled out, and who's going to be doing it? So clearly communicating that can be very effective. And then, of course, one of our favorite things is feedback. So asking for feedback, not just yearly, but throughout the process of what's working, what is working for teachers, and then what is not working for teachers, what can be improved, what can be done differently. And if teachers are talking to each other about what's working, that's great, because then they can, get feedback from each other. But then asking Imago, us, for help too, if we're the ones you're partnering with, was really valuable, so that we can give suggestions and ideas on how to make things a little bit smoother. Another great thing that comes out of working with us and that helped improve feedback was our yearly reports. And so Kara puts together amazing reports that helps analyze, again, you saw those students' responses, what was working for them, and then what did they need help on, or what did we need to improve for the next time we rolled out our content.
These are really good tips and points, and I will say that we also are working on creating sort of just a quick and dirty one-page summary with these tips on them. But if this is something you're interested in and you want a little better understanding or to chat about it, feel free to reach out to us. We love to hear from people, talk to people, pick our brain, and then let us pick yours a little.
Absolutely. But yeah, that feedback piece from teachers, from students, even, I mean, having our student voices, admins, everybody, just so we know, again, what's working, what can be improved, and then what are folks taking back into their world.
One last piece, I think, before we tie up today, as far as implementation tips go, I think part of the planning and also the execution, the follow-up, the feedback, is figuring out, if you really want to make sure you have a certain impact, say it's on improving employability outcomes for students in school or right after school, or improving, maybe you're not using this for CTE, and maybe you want to see it improve just engagement with school for students, or improve their engagement with their academic work, looking at grades, really ahead of time, understanding what kind of data for those students you already have access to really gauge those specific outcomes if you're interested in looking at them. And if you don't have access to it, ideating and designing creative ways where you could try and get access to data like that, or get access to some kind of information in a systemized way about your students to see and compare what were they like before versus after this, or are they any different than the students in my organization, the learners there who might not be getting this programming if it's not district or organization wide.
That's all really good information, Kara. Thank you. It's really good.
All right.
Anything
Did you have
else?
anything else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, do we need to add any more to this, to what we have on the screen? Did you think of
I'm not
anything?
sure. You'll have to forgive us. This is a little odd for us. We're not used to not doing this live, and we wish we could have a candid conversation with you now. But I will say that we will be doing a roundtable discussion right after this. And so we really encourage you to come join us. We would love to have some conversations with you and talk to you a little bit about what you're thinking and answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Kara, for this slide as well, for putting together our references. Because again, we shared some, information that's out there, that's in literature, on top of our study that's in the seed book, which is really cool. But also understanding that it's happening. There's, research all around that's going into this. And so that future of jobs report is really insightful and definitely helps fuel the need for having social emotional learning competencies and content embedded into whatever you're doing, whichever area you decide to put it into. But it is really needed for our youth, and school is one of those natural places for it to land. They're there with you a big chunk of the time. So it just happens to fall into those things. Hopefully they're reinforced at home, but if not, you have the opportunity to help them have tools to again navigate this complex world in a little bit easier way, so that they can be successful, that they can go on to the things that they want to go on to. So you as educators have the opportunity to give them those tools.
Thank you, Mel.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, I hope we get to chat with you at the roundtable discussion. And if you're not able to show up there, or if you need additional resources, anything that we talked about, or want to talk more about it with us more in depth, then you would have the opportunity at the roundtable. Feel free to get in touch with us. We'll send our emails in through the chat. You might have access to them in our profiles, but we'll send them out in the chat just to make sure, because I'm not totally positive.
I was just thinking that I was going to add, we will be chatting our email addresses since they're not on the screen, but I would think they're in the program somewhere. But again, new to this whole realm. So we'll make sure you have those as we're listening in to this presentation while this is going on. So Yeah. Any last minute thoughts, Kara? Anything you want to make sure we end on before folks do meet with us, hopefully live in the live discussion?
I don't think so. I'm grateful to have been able to have the opportunity to talk with you and us to share with all of you. And I hope you all got something useful out of this.
Yes, I'll echo that. And then thanks, Kara, for presenting with me and us being able to have dual presenters and tag teaming this and being able to get this ready to go for this summit. So I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their time, their workshops, all the things that they got to view and be a part of. And thank you for showing up to ours. That's really awesome.